everybody. I'm Noah Cole. I am Associate Professor of Neurologic Science and one of the co-directors of the Neurology Clerkship in AIs. And if 4 months or so ago you had told me that I was going to give this talk, I would not have believed you. But as a clerkship director, we had to sort of take a crash course in learning how to use Zoom to educate students, because we did between 2 and 6 hours of education for the entire class of medical students for 4 or 5 days in a row, depending on which clerkship you were on. So we had to try to do it without boring them to death and make sure they learned something. And thankfully afterwards, all the clerkship directors were able to collectively put their minds together and share successes and failures. So hopefully you guys can all learn from that. So we're going to talk about 2 keys for success today. Preparation and setting expectations and logistics. And the main reason I want to talk about these things are these are the best ways to limit missteps and distractions, which can quickly take away from the quality of your material while you're doing a presentation. So one of the nice benefits about using Zoom is that you can do things asynchronously. I'm on a vacation day mountain biking right now, and you're watching my presentation. So that's one of the clear benefits of it. So for preparation, practice is absolutely critical to getting this to work well. There's really a limited number of things that can go wrong in a Zoom session, but when they happen in real time, you're not prepared for them. They can be pretty stressful, and dead space is often very awkward. So the more you use Zoom and the more you get used to doing things and practicing with it so that you're facile at it, the less likely these things are to happen, the better able you will be to fix them when they do. So the practice is particularly important for you as a presenter, but also for anybody that you're going to invite in to present content in your course. It's important that you practice with them. So typically my practice would be to have a co-presenter join 2 days before on a Zoom session and make sure that everything works and that they understand how to use the technology. So things to go through. The first is timing. You want to make sure, particularly if you have a long presentation, that everybody who's going to be presenting something understands when they need to be there, so that you're not left texting somebody or trying to get their attention so they can join your Zoom meeting. The second would be to go through presentations. PowerPoint slides tend to work really well without a whole lot of difficulties. Sometimes there's some issue with videos, and particularly if you're toggling between different programs while you're doing your presentation, it's really important to go through and make sure that everything works. I think practicing the transitions is absolutely critical. So if you go between a PowerPoint and a YouTube presentation, for example, you want to make sure that you know how to screen share and how to toggle so that the students can hear what they need to hear and so that everybody's able to see everything. And really the best way to do that is to get a spouse or a coworker on a Zoom session and just practice toggling between the different programs while you're on Zoom so that they can let you know if there's anything that doesn't work well. The other thing that I did that I found very helpful was to lay out everything on your desktop in the order that you're going to use it, and to have all the documents open so that you're not left looking through your computer trying to open things as you're doing the presentation. The last part would be to practice the features. So if you're going to be running breakout sessions using any of the polling technology, sometimes there's somebody from IT there to support you, and they're very good at this. But if you're going to be doing it yourself, make sure that you practice it and you sort of have a good understanding of how to use it. My next suggestion would be to make sure that you have a backup plan and support. So it's very helpful to have 2 people running a session. That's partly because it's kind of hard to run a presentation to present material while reading the chat at the same time. You certainly can do it, but it's very helpful if there's somebody else who can monitor the chat for you and be bringing questions to the forefront if they come up in the chat. And the second part is to have a backup plan. That's the other nice part of having a second person who's sort of running the meeting with you. It's helpful to make sure that they have all of the content on their computer as well, so that, let's say your internet connection crashes or you freeze or something happens, the other person can take over at least briefly and make sure that the content is up there so there's not just dead space. The last part would be to optimize your technology. I find it very helpful to use 2 different screens. It'll allow you to run PowerPoints in presenter mode so that you can see your own notes, but also it'll allow you to have the chat up on a separate computer so that you can see what's happening in the chat if you're trying to monitor it yourself. Make sure that your camera's working well, that you have good lighting so that everybody can see you well, and also to think carefully about the programs you have open on your computer. So shut your email if you have automatic alerts, shut your chat if you have a Mac and you can text people on your computer, and make sure to silence your phone so it doesn't go off during the middle of your presentation. So the next part of the logistics and the expectations. So it's really important when you start a Zoom meeting to set very clear expectations for everybody who's part of the meeting so they understand how the technology works, because it'll make your session run much more smoothly. So the first thing is muting. You can set the Zoom presentation so that everybody's muted when they first enter the room. This is really helpful because there's often a lot of chatter back and forth between medical students. So that can help sort of silence things and walk people through how to use it so that they're not trying to speak while they're muted. Show them what the mute button looks like, how to turn it on and off, and encourage people to keep themselves muted at all times unless they're asking a question. In case they can unmute themselves and then remute once they're done asking the question. In terms of the camera, I think Jesse Moore would probably agree with this, that it's very important to try to get everybody to leave their camera on. That allows you to do a couple of things. The first is that it really just makes them more engaged because they know everybody can see them. The second is that it allows you to gauge what's happening, to see if people are getting bored, to see if they're interested, to see if they're doing other things while they're doing your talk. The other thing is with your camera, make sure that your lighting is good so that you don't look like you're in a witness protection program, and make sure that anybody else who's presenting has done the same thing. Moving on to the chat. So the chat feature can be very helpful. It basically allows, it's sort of like texting between everybody, either everybody in the group, or you can send messages to certain people. So when you open up a Zoom session, I would show students where the chat is, tell them how to open it, and point out to them that if they want to ask a question just to the director or the person who's hosting the meeting, they can do that, but they can also post questions to it that other students or other faculty members that are on may be able to answer. Breakout rooms can be very useful. So when we were doing this initially, we had large classes of 125 people, and then we used breakout groups to have them do small discussions. You can set those breakout groups to be as large or as small as you want, and to include specific people or to randomly break up your group. So they can be very helpful. IT usually sets them up, but they're also not hard to do, so that if you were going to run a Zoom meeting yourself, you should be able to do that. You don't have to worry about students getting stuck in them, because you can set a defined period of time so that they come out of the breakout sessions and everybody comes back to the main room when the session is over. The last point would just be about co-hosting. So anybody who's going to screen share during their presentation needs to be made a co-host, and your presentations will work much better if you make those people co-hosts before the Zoom session starts, so that you don't have to go through and monkey with the Zoom technology to try to get it to work in the middle of the session. So just to wrap up, practice, practice, practice. Using all of these features and practicing with them will make the sessions much more fun for you and much more enjoyable for the students. Good luck.
Great. Okay. So Noah gave us a great overview, and we're going to go into some more depth into some of the specifics of how to make sure that some of the functionality that he talked about can be used most effectively in your teaching. And next up is Matt Gilbert to talk about how to use the chat during Zoom.
First step is to learn how to use the technology yourself and unmute yourself. But again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. As I was preparing this presentation, I was kind of struck by thinking about my own journey through technology, and you can see it kind of live here on this first slide. I happen to live in the town in New York where the Senate Majority Leader for the New York State Senate was from. So we actually got more Apple IIe computers than you could shake a stick at when I first started elementary school. So you can see on the left-hand side is the Apple IIe computer. And then both my parents were school teachers. In the middle, you see the Apple IIc computer, which is what I did most of my papers on in high school. I can't imagine how small that screen was with the green lettering. But and then, of course, in college, it was pretty exciting when the science faculty kind of went against the rest of the university and decided to go with iMacs in the science department. So again, just a little bit of tour and see how far we've come just in I feel like the short time since I've been in college. So next slide. So what we're going to talk about for the next 9 minutes or so is going to go through the basics. Some people might not know where the hand raising function is or where to find it. We're also going to talk about the chat function and where that's found on your screen and how to operate that from a logistics standpoint. And then I'm going to give you some pointers that I've found to be effective in the use of both the hand raising and the chat function with regards to implementing those and using those in your teaching sessions, whether it be in a large group, in breakout sessions, when you're giving a lecture, an invited lecture for another department, et cetera. There's lots of different ways to use these really simple functions that I think should be helpful for you. And again, obviously, I'll be at the available at the end for any questions and comments, and would love to hear your best practices with regards to how you're using these things in your everyday practice as well. So if we start with the basics, you'll see this is just a screenshot of what probably most of us are seeing here today without the participant view. And then down on the bottom, we'll see, which we'll circle in red, is the participants tag. So the first step is to click on the participants tag. And when you click on that tag in the next slide, next screenshot, you'll see your participant list come up. And Julie, if you just advance one more time. Yeah, so here are the lists of the folks who are in this particular meeting. Obviously, there's some fairly famous folks that I run around with on a regular basis, so you can see them here. And if you click again, Julia, what we see on the bottom here are all the different tools that you can use. There's the yes, no buttons, which I'm not going to talk about. In the more section, there's actually a coffee cup, which I'm still not exactly sure what we're supposed to use that one for. But the most important thing is that you can see the hand raising tool right here on our left-hand side. And if you click one more time, you'll see that in our participant list is where we're going to see when patients raise and lower their hands. So you can see here that clearly without the help of Robin, Batman has a question. So he has raised his hand and we're able to see that. And I want to stress something that was mentioned by Noah in the last section, is that giving a presentation and monitoring for hand raising can be difficult to do. So that might be something you think about as giving as a task to a colleague, et cetera. So next slide, Julia. So what are some of the ways that you can use this hand raising tool? Well, I found it's kind of a great way for what I call informally polling your audience. So one of the things that I do in NMGI, which I think is quite powerful, is that when I'm in front of all the students in the classroom all at one time, you step from behind the podium, right, to make it a dramatic moment. And you ask the students, how many of you know someone who has diabetes? And to see all those hands go up is a really powerful moment for the students to understand the impact of diabetes in our society. So this is kind of another way where when a student is on a Zoom meeting, all of a sudden they see all those blue hands go up all at the same time. And it can also give that similar powerful experience to being in the classroom. It's not the same, but it can be a way to kind of informally poll people and get those moments that you're looking for that you would normally get in the classroom. It also really allows the learner to interrupt a presentation. I've found it really hard, even in small lecture groups in, say, our case conferences or even our didactics within our fellowship, to find the right time to butt in and unmute yourself and ask a question. Even in a session that's active learning, it can sometimes be a little bit awkward as to when to jump in. A lot more awkward than, say, when you're sitting around a table or in a conference room when you can kind of read the person, or that person can read you and understand when you have a particular question. So I think it's a great way for a student or a learner to kind of raise a hand and say, hey, I really have a question about this. And I think it helps reduce barriers between the presenter and the learner, and it may actually stimulate more of that active learning that we're really trying to get. One of the things that I have noticed in my Zoom teaching, particularly in NMGI, is that I felt there was a little bit less active learning going on because of the setting and using Zoom. I think using the chat and using the hand raising function might be an opportunity to really integrate the comments or the questions of your learners more readily in your presentation and increase that active learning. As echoed by Noah, this is a common theme that I hope you hear through most of our presentations. It is very difficult to give the presentation, monitor the chat, and look for hands being raised all at the same time. So when we did NMGI, it was either one of the other instructors in the course that happened to be on the lecture, or even sometimes it was Julie or other staff members were there, and they'd be monitoring and would interrupt me when they saw a hand go up. Again, to allow that student to get that question in timely at the time where we're discussing that particular topic, but also to increase the active learning. So I would highly recommend that you either have a colleague, say you're giving a presentation to your residents, your students, I would highly recommend to use a colleague or someone else to monitor both the chat function and the hand raising function. Next slide, Julia. So this is just a screenshot of where the chat section is. It's pretty straightforward, but it's located here on the bottom on chat. And you just click that once. And when you click that, what you'll see is the chat will come up on the side. I don't have a lot of time to go through this, but there is some settings that you can do that you can set up your chat the way you like. I've set mine up so that the newest chat is always up on top rather than on the bottom, so I don't have to scroll down, etc. But this, again, is an opportunity for, as a presenter, for us to plant either questions to the group, or I've actually seen it used pretty effectively as when I'm giving an area, I'm addressing a specific learning objective, I'll actually post that learning objective or have someone post that learning objective right there in the chat session so that students are aware that this is the section that really connects, this is the learning or the information that connects to a specific learning objective. It also obviously allows the learner to ask questions that may spark different conversations than you had planned and increase that active learning and change the dynamic a little bit, make it feel more interactive than it necessarily would be because everyone's spread out all over. And again, I really do think that monitoring the chat section requires the assistance of another individual. So I would highly recommend you use that. Next slide. And again, last thing about the chat function, again, just if we finish up with our tour of ancient technology that I used to use, the only chat I used to remember when I was a kid was AOL Instant Messenger, which has finally disappeared from life as we know it. But it's, again, an opportunity for active participation. I was recently doing Noon Report, which I thought was pretty interesting because as we were discussing particular studies, some of the participants actually went and found the reference on PubMed and then posted it in the chat so that all the residents on Noon Report were able to then go to PubMed and download that PDF and keep it for them at that important trial. So another kind of neat way to use the chat function. It also allows individuals to chat privately with each other. I think it's really important that you warn folks that before they post a chat. I have been on countless meetings where things have appeared in the chat that were clearly directed towards one individual that got sent out to everyone. So that's something that you don't want to have embarrass a learner or have something happen in the middle of your session. So I always warn folks that, hey, make sure before you send out a chat, if you're trying to chat with another individual or answer someone else's question or provide them with the link, et cetera, just to a particular person, that you make sure it's going privately to them. And, you know, with the question of what types of questions do you ask and use in the chat session, I would avoid questions where you want the whole group to answer. So obviously, if you have 55, 60 students in a virtual office hours and you ask them, can you all name, please, one of the pathophysiologic features of type 2 diabetes? It's going to be a long time until all 55 people put something in chat. It's just not good use of your time. So think about using questions and using that potentially as, has everyone heard of insulin resistance as a pathophysiologic, you know, mechanism behind type 2 diabetes, and have them raise their hand. So just use the chat function wisely. So that's all I have. Thanks again, and look forward to some questions at the end.
Great, thank you, Matt. That was terrific. And there's been a little bit of chat going on as you've talked about the chat.
Oh, good.
It's been great. I've been monitoring that for you and answering questions. We're going to keep moving. And Dr. Rideout is going to talk about using breakout rooms.
So hey, everybody. The chat is my favorite part of Zoom because it's just great to have little private conversations and public conversations, but breakout rooms are super fun too. So I'm going to go through setting up breakout rooms, kind of when we do it and how, and talk about large group debriefing in between breakout room breakouts. And then we're going to go through some examples that I've worked on this year, and then you're actually going to practice. So get ready. So for large or medium-sized groups, it's super handy to break into smaller groups because, as you know, all the little boxes on the screen are usually silent. Nobody usually volunteers to say stuff when everybody's up there. So if you break them out into smaller groups, most people will turn on their camera and come alive and start talking. Next slide, Julia. So the optimal size of groups is about 4 to 6, but students have actually said that 4 is really better. And it just people are just more likely to contribute. The length of time in a breakout room, I always feel like shorter is better. It really depends on what the prompts are and what they're going to be working on in their breakout room. But really 5 to 10 minutes is great. They should have some really structured things that they're working on. If it's a lot longer, then people go off and get a cup of coffee and are kind of abandoning it for a while. So short is best. There's a few things to tell students before they go out into their breakout rooms. First, they should remember the number, and they should choose a spokesperson. It makes your job a lot easier when you're facilitating a large group session to be able to just call on, group 1, and then the person from that group knows who they are, and they're going to be the spokesperson. The spokesperson should shift around if there's multiple breakout rooms per session. Remind them to choose a different person for each one. And then importantly, students can't see the main screen when they're in the breakout room, but they can share a screen within their breakout room. So if you have stuff that they're going to be working on, like cases or documents, send it ahead of time. Like for example, for our PEDS clerkship remote course, we sent them all the documents 15 minutes ahead of time. And so they had them and they could pull them up when they were ready. Next slide. So when you bring students back between breakout rooms, it's pretty handy to have an empty document to write down, depending on what you're doing, but you can just stick an empty PowerPoint slide right into your PowerPoint, and then you can kind of type away with the screen shared with students, or you could have an empty Word document. We have found the whiteboard within Zoom is tricky to navigate real time, so we didn't actually have success with that. And so an important thing is keeping track of which rooms have been called on, because you want obviously to spread it around. So found the low tech, the easiest thing is just have a piece of paper and write down all the numbers on a piece of paper and then cross it off whenever you call on somebody, and then you can kind of see who's left. And we always say, like, not everyone is going to get called on, obviously every session, but we try to spread it around. And next slide. Okay, so we're going to work through 2 examples. The first example was from our remote PEDS clerkship that we just did in June. And every day we had a live session with the students that were 90 minutes. So there were 120 students, so large group. And we had every one of the dots on this little blue box is a student. And they started off in the main session. We gave an intro to what they would be doing and set the stage. An important thing is, when you're going to break into breakout rooms, don't do it right at the beginning of the session, like within the first few minutes, because a lot of people come late. And if people come late, then you have to manually figure out where they're going to go. So it's better to wait for 5 or even 10 minutes and then break into breakout rooms. So next slide. Okay, so then we broke into breakout rooms, and each of these little boxes has 4 students in it. And they and the host and co-host stayed in the main room, while the students on their own worked through, it was a readiness quiz, had 5 questions, MBME style, and they had worked on it before, but this is kind of like their group, their GRAT kind of thing. Pretty informal though. And they knew that they were gonna have to have an answer for all 5 questions just in case they were the one called on. Next slide. And then they all came back and we had a robust discussion. We went through each question. We shared the screen with a question on it, and then just took our piece of paper and just called on one group at a time and just, asked them what they thought, and more importantly, why they thought it, and just kind of challenged them with different questions related to the main question. And there were also questions coming in on the chat, and it was great. It was really a little chaotic, but it went well. And that we took about 15 minutes on. And then next slide. Then for part 2, so it's kind of like a modified TDL. We did an application case. So this was about a baby in the nursery with jaundice, so pretty general. And we wanted them to think about a differential diagnosis. So we introduced the case just for a minute or 2, then sent them back into breakout rooms. Next slide. And they were the same students in each room with a different spokesperson. They talked about the differential diagnosis, and they were just supposed to come back and just rapid fire, talk about the differential. So they came back really quickly. Next slide. And then we had a blank PowerPoint slide that we just typed in everything they said. And some of it was coming in on the chat and some of it was coming in by me calling on different people. And then we came up with a great list, and that was just pretty quick, like 5 to 10 minutes at the very most. And then next slide. Then we had them ask history and physical exam questions to try to refine the differential. We actually weren't organized enough to have them actually have another document and write it down, but I think you could have like 2 columns or something and write down their history questions. It got honestly just a little out of control in this part, but there's just a lot coming in on the chat, but it was a very robust discussion. And then next slide. And then we sent them out in their same groups to just like quickly talk about it. And then last slide. And then they came back in and we just had a wrap up, talked about the final diagnosis and the whole experience. So that was the first example. It was really successful, and we did a different version each day for a different part of pediatrics. And I'm gonna talk about a second example, which was a smaller group. So this group is the 4th year pediatric students. There's about 16 of them, and we have a lot of different sessions, but we meet once a week. But this particular session worked really well over Zoom. It was a skill workshop on calling a consult. So the beginning, we had all 16 students in the main room, and we gave them a little mini didactic on how to call a consult. And next slide. And then we sent them out into their breakout rooms without a facilitator in the room. It was just the 4 students. They had a student note, 4 different student notes to kind of look through and think about what they were going to call for a consult. And then they called actually the person matched with the room. They actually called on the telephone, gave them a consult call. And then next slide. The facilitator for each room went in and had a small group discussion with that breakout room to give them feedback on that one call. And then they did this 3 times for 3 different cases. So it is faculty intensive. We had 2 residents and another faculty and myself do it. It worked really well, but it did take a few extra facilitators. And then next slide. And then we all came back at the end and had kind of large group debrief and closure with everybody. So 2 examples of different ways to use breakout rooms. And we'll take questions at the end, but first, you're gonna get the opportunity to have breakout rooms. So this is gonna be super short. So you're gonna go into a breakout room of 4 people. You're gonna only have around 2 minutes. And with your 4 people in your room, make sure your video is on, hopefully, although we understand if it's not. You're gonna debate with your group what's the best season in Vermont. Super quick. And then choose a spokesperson of in your breakout room and remember your room number. We're gonna send you a warning when you have 1 minute left, and be prepared to share with the large group when you come back, okay? Have a good time. Hope you meet some new people.
Breakout room 2. I'll send a 1 minute warning, a message now. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
And then I set the automatic countdown for 30 seconds.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's great. Julia, how are we doing on time?
I think you're good. I think so. Just Lori has to go, and she should only be 5 to 10 minutes. So
yeah, I'm only going to call on 3. I'm going to call just on three different groups. It'll be really quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just here. I'll give them their 30 seconds now, and then if you have maybe 5 more minutes, then we'll be good. I think
it'll be less than that. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay, it looks like everybody's back. I think we had around 40. Okay, so I'm just going to call on 3 different groups and have your spokesperson say what's your favorite season, what's the best season in Vermont and why. So how about group 5? Someone from group 5?
We were group 5. Stephen was going to be our spokesman. Maybe he didn't unmute.
I didn't unmute. Sorry about that.
Oh, great.
You hear me okay now?
Yeah.
All right. So we had a spirited discussion in group 5 for that minute and a half. But as spokesperson, I made the executive decision that spring would be the best season. It's a long winter. Everybody's kind of gotten through it, and then eventually you get into spring, and it's very uplifting. Summer's not that far away, so I kind of think of spring as being the best overall season.
Awesome. Let's get someone else. How about group 8? What's the best season for your group?
Hello, I'm Rebecca. I'm representing group 8. We quickly had to decide between summer and fall, and the consensus was fall. Perfect sleeping weather, beautiful colors, no mosquitoes. So that was group 8, fall.
All right, one more group. How about group 3? What's your consensus?
I was hoping you weren't calling on us, Molly. No. So we all decided that it was a 50-50 split between summer and winter, mostly because the activities that you could do, either you're a skier or not. And at the end, we sort of met in the middle with fall because it was a compromise of both of all of our needs.
So it seems like fall is the winner overall, but I hear a little bit of spring, a little bit of winter, and no summer. Interesting. Cool. Well, that was fun. Thank you, everybody.
All right, great. Thanks, Molly. That was wonderful. Okay, and last but not least, Dr. Gellis is going to talk to us about some polling that you can do.
Hi, everybody. I'm remembering to unmute myself. My name is Lori. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, I'm seeing nods. Fantastic. So this conversation has been fantastic. I love seeing how everybody is participating and engaging in the conversation on Zoom. That's one of the things that we work really hard to do when we leverage technology in a remote situation. So today I've been asked to talk a little bit about how you leverage digital clickers to do those types of things. So there's a lot of names for what we're doing these days. I refer to it as integrated instruction. You'll see with the colored bubbles, there's distance education, distributed, blended, online, remote. There's a lot of things going on right now with the pandemic, with the shift from the emergency remote teaching to online learning. And it's a great time because we're all allowed to focus a little bit more on the learning process now that we've gotten a little more stable. So that's great. In EdTech, on the ed side, we talk a lot about a couple different models. We work very closely with the curriculum team in alignment with Bloom's taxonomy. For people that, very briefly, that's terminology used to describe what you're asking students to achieve during their learning sessions. In the EdTech side, we use the SAMR model, which basically talks about substitution, augmentation, modification, or replacement of something you would do in person with a tool. Unlike Bloom's, there is no progression that is better than the other in terms of thinking or higher order thinking. It is simply what is the best tool and the best way to use technology to help support the learning that's happening, whether it's on a Zoom call or not. So, and lastly, there's the ICAP framework that we look at a lot. It's a little bit older, but those letters stand for interactive, constructive, active, and passive. And most in alignment with what we're doing at Learner with active learning, the idea is that you want to look at cognitive engagement with your learners and use technology to leverage those higher order things where you want people to remain engaged. You know, there's literature out there that says that even in active learning situations when you're in person, it's really hard to make sure that everybody is cognitively engaged. And so technology can be used quite a bit to help keep people participating. So digital clickers or digital response systems is one great way to do that. So as I was saying, at LCOM, what we do right now, we suggest using TurningPoint. We've had the use of TurningPoint for a very long time in our curriculum. We have recently piloted the use of TurningPoint digital clickers, so not the handheld ones that our students have used before, in 2 courses in the Foundations curriculum. And we have also purchased licenses now for digital clickers for all of our students, so they don't have to have the physical actual technology in their hands. They can use their computer, they can use their mobile smartphone, tablets, whatever connects to the internet. What we are working towards is everybody with a Med account having an account to be able to participate, and but our students won't need to sign in necessarily in order to take the poll. So people that have used TurningPoint before with our team, this will not be very different at all as to what you were doing in a classroom. Our EdTech team is working on help sessions and videos and documentation so that everybody has a support structure in place to leverage this technology and help our students remain engaged. Second on this slide, there have been a lot of questions, and we've noted that there is informal polling in Zoom, and people have said, well, why don't we just use that? There's a couple reasons why we've decided to suggest TurningPoint. Again, we try to keep a consistent experience and approach for our students because we don't know where they're coming from or where they're physically placed or what their access is like. Students have used TurningPoint before, and they will use it again once we get back to whatever our normal state will be for instruction. We may or may not be using Zoom, but we will definitely be using some sort of response system. So TurningPoint has been stable, and so we plan to use that. In addition, if a group is using Zoom in a room to participate, not all the students can click in individually to give their response. As we just saw with the breakout rooms, you can always have a person that's identified as a spokesperson, but using TurningPoint would allow you to be able to engage those individual participants anonymously or not, however you decide, to get their individual input. So let's try it. So if everybody has a minute to go to rwpoll.com, you can see my screen at the top right, which may be behind your video feed right now. I'm going to put out the session ID. So what you would do is go to rwpoll.com. I'm going to do that on my mobile device, just like you are. And I'm going to put in the session ID that's right on the screen. Can everybody see it? If you cannot, it's 255199. You will see polling closed. That's important because I haven't clicked this green button. So I'm going to click it now. And then I'm going to move my slide forward and ask you the first question, which is, have you ever used a digital clicker before? So you can touch, I'll hold my phone up to the, you can touch any of the letters on the bottom to give your response. And already we're seeing a lot of people jumping in. So I'm going to wait just a second. There is a timer function you can use as well. There are a lot of different little quirks and things you can turn on and off to support the instruction. But for today's purpose, we'll just wait just another minute. Okay, so with 23 or 22 responses, I'm going to hit the stop button. And immediately you'll get visual feedback on your device and my screen, showing that 54% of the respondents said no, they hadn't used the digital clicker, and then 45-ish% said they have. So I will close that, click to the next slide, and hit the play button. And your device should update to the next question. So which of the following colors is your favorite? Great, and I will stop it for right now. And it will show me the responses. So the function of TurningPoint that I'm using right now, it just is very simple. There's no programming ahead of time. You just start the poll and it works alongside of you. You don't have to integrate it into your PowerPoint other than having the text of your question. There are other advanced features that can be built in, and we're happy to support that. But what I wanted to demonstrate today was specifically how you can do the easiest on-the-fly type of question building and interaction with your students. And so I'm going to hand this back for Julia. to move the slides. And so for the next steps, our team, the EdTech team and CommTS, can help you download software and support you in training and create a plan so that your curriculum can be supported by these types of tools. And again, we work very closely with the curriculum services team. And so I will pass this off to Jesse for the second half of the slide.
Great. And thank you, Lori. And what the active learning team can do, the instructional design support that we offer is less on the tech side, but if you want to think about, what's the right way to integrate some of this this technology or polling, what kinds of questions are best for that? How do you align that with the pre-learning materials that you put together for your session? That kind of instructional design is the support we can offer through the active learning team. So I know that this whole session has been really informative, but it probably, and as evidenced by the chat, already is raising more questions, and we expect that. And these are the two resources that you have to go to help answer those questions outside of this session. So at this point, what I want to do is take some of your questions. I've tried to answer some of them on the fly as we've moved along here in the chat, but I want to give you all the opportunity to try that hand raising function. So if you have a question, use the hand raising function that Dr. Gilbert showed you, and then we'll all see if you have raised your hand, and then I'll call on people and they can unmute the microphone and ask the question. So go ahead and raise your hand. Dr. Irvin, go ahead.
And I've blanked my video because I am trying to eat lunch. I want to tell you guys, this session has been absolutely fabulous. And it's fabulous because I'm trying to set something up in August, and there's so much to Zoom that I just don't know how to use. And I've been using Zoom long before many of you, I suspect, and it's still such a learning curve. I want to encourage you to continue to have more of these so we can take a deeper dive into some of the other things and answer some of the questions. But a big kudo to all of you. This was really, really good and very timely. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the kind words. And I'll pause here and just say that our speakers have all done an amazing amount of work to put this together. And then on the back side of this, Amanda Broder from the Teaching Academy and Julia O'Connor, who has been, who put all of our slides together and actually made them look good and has been running the slides and troubleshooting the tech behind the scenes. Thank you to both of them.
Big shout out to her.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mary Alice Favreau, you had a question?
Yes, do all the students in CNHS have access to TurningPoint?
Just remembering to unmute myself, that's a thing that I always forget. So right now, people that have access to build TurningPoint polls need a med.uvm.edu account. And students can participate without having to log in if that is the way that you would like to proceed to take a poll. You can take a poll as long as you have the session ID.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
That answers, there was a question in the chat about Albany College, and I'm sure Mary Val Palumbo, you were thinking about the IPE session, and you can build polling in, we can do that, and as we demonstrated, anybody with the right session ID can participate in the poll. So those Albany College of Medicine students will certainly be able to participate if that's how you design your session. Bei Zhang, you had a question?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have 3 questions. So my first question is, I see the yes and the no just next to the raising hand. So if that means that we can actually design some true or false questions within the Zoom, right, without going into the TurningPoint. So which means the student doesn't need a second device or open another screen of the computer. So if we could suggest to Zoom, if they could just add A, B, C, D, E next to yes or no, maybe we can do the polling questions right in Zoom. Right, but this is something that Zoom got to do. It's not in our hands, right? So this is my first question.
Yeah,
and second question.
Let me respond.
Yeah, sure.
Let me do one question at a time because I'm not good at keeping track of them all. So
Oh, okay, good, sure.
I think the challenge with that kind of approach is if you have a large group, so our class size is 124 students. And so if you did a yes/no question, you would see a whole bunch of yes and no's, but it doesn't actually tell you, 30 said yes and the other 90 said no. And so you would have to be counting and scrolling, and it would be really inefficient. If you do the simple polling part, then you can see very quickly, as Lori demonstrated, what your percentages are. Same thing would be for A, B, C, and D. You'd have to be doing the manual kind of counting. And so I think that's actually where it's important to remember that Zoom is built as a business platform, and it's not built as an instructional technology.
Yes.
And so that's where those polls in the chat are really good for kind of quick, easy, informal. But I think for instruction, I would encourage you to build them with TurningPoint, because I think you'll be able to use the tool better. What was your second?
Sure. Jesse, if I could just add to that, I think one of the important things that I try to do when I'm teaching, particularly in NMGI, is that if I'm doing a review of pharmacology and I see on the poll that 90% of the students get the question right, I actually will then skip the kind of teaching slides that are follow-up, and I'll move on and spend, because there might be a question where it's 50-50, we need to spend a lot more time instructing the students in that particular area. If there's an area where you know that the vast majority of students have the concept down, you don't need to review it, move on to spend that classroom time on something else.
You had a second question?
Yes, I do. Well, thank you for allowing me. So my second question is, so this session is very good. I totally agree with Charlie. And so this session right now seems like only offered to the faculties, right? I think it is as important as to offer such a training session to the students as well, so we can make the best use of the Zoom. So for example, and a lot of things can happen while students do Zooming. And if we kind of predict those problems and, train them in advance, that actually help to relieve a lot of, anxiety for students as a learner. So I would suggest to bring this session not only to the faculty member regularly, but at the beginning of the semester to all the medical students.
Great suggestion. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
I think you said you had 3 questions. Is there another one?
Well, I'm going to leave questions to others and let others ask. If we still have time, I'm going to add my third question.
Okay. Thank you. Jason Garbarino?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have 2 quick questions. The first, is there a way to take attendance in Zoom?
You can. So you can record, you can capture kind of the participant list and who was on it. And that's one way to do it. You could also build it in using the polling, would be another way to try and do it. Okay. Laura, do you want to say more about that?
You're absolutely correct, Jesse, in the Zoom functionality. It hasn't been discussed yet as whether or not it would be appropriate to do that using clickers, but there is a tool, TurningPoint added a tool in more recent times that would be able, if the curriculum agreed that was a way that was approved by all the appropriate channels to do such a thing, there would be a way to do that.
Okay, great, thanks. And my second question, the first presenter hinted on going over expectations with students, and in nursing we've talked about etiquette. Have you come up with a policy or anything for students that they're supposed to abide to in terms of their Zoom etiquette?
We don't have a standing policy about it. I mean, we talk a lot at the College of Medicine about professionalism in general. I think that the pandemic got thrust on us, and our pivot to Zoom happened so quickly that we haven't had that opportunity. I think, hearing what both Dr. Zhang and yourself are raising, they're great points, to kind of set the stage at the beginning of a semester to say, these are our expectations about how this platform is used. So I think we haven't done it, but it's a great reminder of something we should put on the to-do list for the next 4 weeks.
Jesse, if I could just chime in one thing, I think having the cameras on is one of the most important things. I can't tell you how many times that I've lectured to a group of 12 folks and I don't see one single person. As a presenter, it's hard to interact with your group when you're even just seeing nodding heads helps. So I make sure I try to nod my head when I'm on these things to give some feedback to the presenter. So I would say if you do adopt the policy, having the camera on. I've also had some people be embarrassed when the meeting's over and the two co-hosts were staying on to discuss something privately, and you could still see that one person whose video was off was still on and clearly wasn't listening to the presentation, was just kind of logged on. So you don't want to embarrass that person either.
Yeah, we have had some feedback as we've used Zoom that some of the students, particularly in the large group sessions, actually find it uncomfortable. And they also reflect that, Zoom lets people into your personal space, So right now, Jason, I don't know where you are, but I'm someplace that normally I wouldn't be seeing, right? I would normally not see wherever you are. We'd be in a meeting in a med ed room for this session. So there is a little bit of, there's some other things to consider there about blanket rules around, cameras on. So that's, at least why for this session, I said our preference is that you have it on for engagement, but it's the lunch hour. So if you're eating and don't want to do that in front of everybody, that's totally fine. So there are some other things to consider there.
You certainly don't need every camera on, but having some on is nice to see some feedback. So the people that do feel comfortable, it's important to keep it on, I think.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind, just to really hop on quickly to this, for people, sometimes it's a comfort thing for space. Sometimes it's an equity and access issue. There may be people that are coming in remotely where their connection isn't strong enough, or maybe they can't afford that kind of connection or something like that. So it's always really important to read the room and try and not expose somebody who may be in a less equitable situation for whatever reason.
We have time for one last question. Shelley Bellman.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, how do we talked about you can get the participants list, you can get the chat list. How do I, when I'm the instructor and I'm ending the session, how do I get that stuff?
So the in the lower right-hand corner of the chat, there's a little square with soft edges and 3 dots in the middle of it. If you click that, it gives you the save chat option, and you can save the chat, and it'll take it right to a file and your downloads folder. I don't know actually how to save the participants. It might be the same way. Either Julia or Laura, do you know the answer to that question, how to save the participant list?
As the host, you can access it at any time from your Zoom account. You can go look at all the details of the meeting after the fact.
There we go. Okay, so we're at 1 o'clock. I want to end this again by thanking all of the participants, the support from the Teaching Academy, the curriculum team, EdTech team, Julia and Amanda for making this happen, and to all of you for taking the time to come. And we hope to hear from you all with subsequent questions, and have a great rest of your day.